The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I want to thank everyone for joining me today as we look at how to use the new features of version 16. And I know the biggest question that everybody has is, where is it? It is going to be releasing shortly, and obviously with the planning of this date, it was supposed to be released by now. But our quality assurance team is holding it back. They see an issue that they want resolved before they'll release it. They want to make sure that it's perfect before it gets to you so that when you install, you can enjoy the software and be reassured that it will be as stable as possible. So they're just holding it back just to make sure that there's some fixes that they want done before they release it. I would give you a release date, but I honestly don't have it myself. Once they give it to me to release, I push a button and it goes out to all of you. Everything is sitting there waiting for that to happen. And from what I'm told, it's momentary, but it will happen shortly, and we will get to it as soon as possible. But today, before you get your release, let's go over how to use those new features when they do arrive to you so that you'll be able to put them into your daily work habits and be able to take advantage of them. So today I'm going to step through all of those different features that we stepped through earlier if you did join us for the release V16 features. But I'm just going to dig a little deeper today to make sure you understand how to use them to the best of their abilities. So first of all, I'm going to look at the roof framing. So I'm going to just change my view here so we can get a good look at the roof itself. I'm going to select the roof and I'm going to look at its properties and go here to specify framing. This feature is one that is going to be in Building Essentials and Construction Suite. So if you're using Pro Architect or Personal Architect, hold on, we've got features that I'll cover for you, but this one specifically is for Building Essentials and Construction Suite dealing with framing. When you go into the roof framing dialog box, it lists all of the individual members that make up and comprise the roof's framing if you are going to stick frame, rafter frame the roof. Down at the very bottom, there's two new categories there, purlins and battens. During our release webinar, you only saw purlins, but we had someone come in and say, well, if you're doing purlins, could you do battens? So we brought that to our developers to say, could you do this? And they made it happen. So purlins will go underneath the rafters, battens go above the rafters, and I'll show you that in just a minute. As a default in the catalog, they're set to no initially. So if you do want to include purlins and battens, you'll have to turn them on by coming in here and changing no to yes. When you do that, you can select a member that you want to use for the purlins. This one is set as a default to a 2x4. But just by picking on this little button here, that takes you back out to the catalog so you can select any member that you want to use and just click OK when you found it. Underneath that, you'll see usage and phase. And this is specifically for the material list. So when you're organizing the purlins in the material list, you can give them a name. I've added the name to the catalog, the default catalog of purlin. So that will be in there. But if you want to call it anything else, you can. These are just names. They don't have any other reference or relevance other than organizing in the material list. When it gets organized into the material list, it also goes into a very specific phase. The default one here is roof framing. But if you wanted to put it into another phase, you can create another phase. This again is just to organize the information in the material list. So it's not just 100 2x4s landing in a list, but those 2x4s are labeled as purlin in the phase of construction called roof framing. So it's very logical and easy to find and order those elements. So again, those can be anything that you want. When you pick that member, you can change its orientation. So you can see here that I've rotated this 2x4 to 90 degrees because the default orientation of a 2x4 is this orientation here. So if we're looking at the roof, it would be right side up. So I've flipped it 90 degrees so it has this orientation. So you can rotate that on any angle that you want. That's specifically rotating the orientation of the member that you're looking at, not on the roof, but the member itself, how it's rotated. Then we look at how you're spacing the purlin. So this allows you to define a set spacing value. So I'm doing it every 2 feet. So every 2 feet up the slope of the roof, there will be a purlin. That can be any distance that you want. You just simply click in here and you can type in any new distance. So if you want to see those every foot, every 16 inches, every 4 feet, that is up to you, totally customizable, and you can type in a new value there. Offset from the ridge. So when the purlins come up to the ridge, how far away from the ridge do you want them? You might want them right up there. If you want it right up at the ridge, you can leave that at 0. But if you want them to fall back away from the ridge, you can type a value there, like 1 foot as I have. So up to the ridge, it'll be at least 1 foot away from the ridge of the roof. And this would be the same for the fascia. So we're holding it back from the ridge. We can also hold it back from the fascia. So if I typed in 2 feet here, the first purlin would begin 2 feet away from the fascia. Do I want to reset the spacing at segment boundaries? So when I come to a valley, do I want to reset it at the next roof segment? I said no. Do I want to place a purlin at that segment? So right where they are meeting, do I want to have one right there? I've said no as well. And place it right at the holdback. So where I've said hold it back 2 feet from the fascia, do I want to start with one right there or just follow the spacing that I have? And again, I've said no, but you can say yes for that as well. The same holds true for the battens. I change it to yes, I want to include it. And then I pick the specific member that I want to use. This time I've used 2x2s just so we can see the difference very clearly when I go back out and show you where this is all going to be in our model. I've labeled them as battens, and battens will be a new usage in the new version 16 catalog. And the phase is called roof framing. If you want to call it anything else, again, go in there, call them what you need them to do. I think of that very specifically for people that are framing with trusses. You might not call them purlins and battens. You might call it temporary bracing. And because we ship around the world in 3 different languages, that might be a very different name for you. It might not be a purlin or a batten, but when I show you it physically on the roof, you might have that aha, well, we call that here, I'll come up with the word nogging like we do for up the wall. That might be called nogging. So you can change that so it is the same terminology that you would use. These can be included even if you are using trusses. By setting this to yes, that means it's going to appear. So you'll see those purlins and battens, even if it is a truss roof. So if you do temporary bracing or you want to have a purlin underneath for whatever reason with your trusses, you can include them. This isn't just for stick framing. These will be included with your trusses as well. Same thing with the rotation, can be rotated. Obviously a 2x2 is a 2x2 in any orientation, so I don't need to rotate it. Spacing again, 2 feet. Every 2 feet I'm going to have a batten. I'm holding it back 1 foot from the ridge, and I'll follow through and do 2 feet from the fascia. Do I want to reset it? Yes, I do for each one of these so you can see the distinct difference here. Okay, I'm just going to click OK and remove out all of those drawings that I made and click OK again. When I go to View, Framing, Display Framing, you'll now see them situated up on the roof. So on the top of our rafters, let me just change this to a rendered outline view so we can distinguish from those a little bit better. So we have our rafters here, And with our rafters sitting on top of that, you can see here is our 2x2, and that 2x2 is our batten. And then underneath there, we see our 2x4, and that 2x4 is our purlin. Okay, so they're spaced up along the roof all the way every 2 feet. And you can see them going through, just stacked right on top of each other through this diagram. Okay, again, if I could turn off the rafters and everything else if I was doing trusses and just include these, and that would be there. Okay, so remember all of those different settings. We are recording today's class. So if you want to refer back to this, you'll be able to watch this over and over again. We will send out a video so that you'll be able to watch this again and pick up on these tips again if you need to. Okay, I'm going to go back up to view, framing, display all but the framing to get rid of those for you. I'm going to put this back into a 2D view and zoom in on the house here. And I'm going to start importing some files. And when I import the files, Envisioneer 16 now includes OBJ files. And we also have a new routine for what we term as very large blocks. And I'll show you both of those. So File, Import through the Object Wizard. And in the Object Wizard, I could give it a name and where I'm going to file it. And then I hit on this Select button. And this Select button allows me to go through out onto my hard drive and find a OBJ file. So I've just changed the pull down here to OBJ because these are all the various different types of files that we can bring in. So I'm bringing in this OBJ file. The dialog box will instantly populate and tells you because this is an OBJ file, it's being optimized to be used with Envisioneer. What that means is OBJ files are a little bit different than SketchUp files that you've been able to bring in, 3D Studio files, and DWG files. OBJ files are brought in with their very specific materials. So you can see this range. It has a stainless steel material applied to it. That is always going to be with this particular block. OBJ files lock in the materials. Okay, so you can see, normally I can say how I want to create the components by materials or by layer. You can't do that with an OBJ file. They come in as all comprised together. They're highly detailed blocks, OBJ files. They normally are smaller file sizes than other file sizes, so they're optimal for use in that manner as well. And that's why we're allowing you to bring them in. They're very popular type of block format now. I click Next and Next and give it a scale. So this isn't any different than what you did before when you were bringing in any other type of blocks. But this page is different. This plan and elevation page. Previously in other versions, when you got this far, you would turn on and off the different layers and components that comprise that DWG file and SketchUp file. And from there, you sliced or created a elevation view and a plan view so that when you looked at this block in those different orientations, you had that appearance. OBJ files typically include that for you. Some of them might not, though. And when they don't, you have the ability to replace it with a custom plan view by hitting Select here. And when you hit Select, you're going out and you're looking for a DWG or a DXF file. A plan representation, so someone has created a plan view of this range as a DWG file or a DXF file. What we've done is we can also slice through it, and I'll show you that when we get to the very large blocks. OBJ files can include them, but you can also, as I said, create a custom one and select it. If you go with that custom option and select it, the outline of that plan or the outline of that elevation must be a polyline, a continuous polyline. If it doesn't, it will bring up an error. So if you are going to create your own plan views and elevation views, you don't have to. Most OBJs come with their own, and we can do a slice, as I'll show you later. Just know that the outside edge has to be a continuous polyline. Okay, but we can see it's got a plan view, it's got an elevation view. Most OBJs will have that for you. Okay, click next and then finish. And it's telling me that I've just currently turned off those elements, but here it is. So here is our OBJ file. Okay, I'll step inside and place a camera to look at that. You can see there's nothing too different than any other block you brought in, but if I double click on its properties and bring that up, you'll notice that there's no appearance tab. Most of our objects, most everything has an appearance tab in Envisioneer. OBJ files cannot. Their materials cannot be swapped out. What you bring them in as and what they were saved as in that original OBJ file is part of that OBJ. So you can't change that appearance, and that's why you will not see a appearance tab here when you're looking at an OBJ file. Okay, but you can still scale it and everything else that you could with any other block, but you won't be able to change the appearance. Now let me bring in what we determine as a very large block. So I'm going to go back to import and go to our object wizard again. And again, I'm going to select on the select button. And this time I'm going to be looking for a SketchUp file. I have a SketchUp file on my desktop that is very large. You'll notice that this file size is over 4 meg. Anything over 4 megabytes, Envisioneer now sees as a very large block. Previously, when you tried to bring in very large blocks, I mean, we saw files coming into our technical support where they had brought in a couch and the couch was 30 megs in itself. To put that in relation to an Envisioneer file, Envisioneer files are usually about 10 megs. So these files, these blocks that were being brought in were much larger than even the entire Envisioneer file was. So handling those, you probably noticed it slowed your system down. So what we're doing now to bring in these large blocks is that we are going to optimize it. So you'll see this dialog box appear anytime you bring in a block that is over 4 megabytes. It's going to optimize it. It's going to pare it down. It's not going to affect the appearance of that block so that you can navigate and everything very quickly. It's speeding up Envisioneer even when you're using very large blocks. Okay, so I'm just going to click OK there. And that is going to take that block through the process of optimizing it for us. And then we see the block itself. Okay, I hit next. I can orientate it just like I did before. And then I come into this plan view and elevation. This was a SketchUp file, so it didn't include a plan view and an elevation. So by optimizing the block during that process, we also took slices to create a plan view and slices to create an elevation view. If you're not happy with those slices that it creates on import, you have the ability again to replace them with something that's customized. So out in AutoCAD or even in Envisioneer in our worksheet space, you can sketch out a plan representation of this sofa as an example and an elevation view of this sofa as an example, and then save it as a DWG file and bring it in. But the same thing, the outline, the exterior edge of the plan view and the elevation when you're bringing it in to replace it for the plan or the elevation must be a polyline or it will throw up an error. It has to be a polyline. You can accept the slices that we created or you can bring in your own. Again, I click next and finish, and a copy of that sofa attaches to my cursor. It's over 4 meg. It's bigger than the file size of this sample model that I'm in right now, but you can see I can still navigate and move around quickly. Part of that optimization was including the plan and elevation, and the other part of that is, again, removal of that appearance page. It will adhere the current materials that were attached to that block, but it will not give you the opportunity to swap them out. It's optimizing those materials. It's normally those materials that inflate that file size to be so big. So by including it and bundling it in, it optimizes it, brings it down to a reasonable file size so that you can navigate around Envisioneer without losing any time. Okay, so that's bringing in OBJ files and what we determine as very large blocks, any block that's over 4 megabytes. These two abilities are available in all of our products. So regardless if you're using Personal Architect, Pro Architect, Building Essentials, or Construction Suite, you'll all have that same ability to use that. Okay, while we're in this view, I am going to grab a window and put it on that back wall. And part of that window, I'm going to look at its properties, go to the quantity tab, and say uncheck include in quantities. Every element that you have in Envisioneer, you can uncheck that you don't want it to be included in the quantity takeoffs. So that's great for remodel projects where that might be an existing window. You don't want to count it and buy a new one. It's there, it's part of the model, but you need to see it. I don't want to count it. So you uncheck to include it in the quantities, and then it won't be part of the quantities. I'm going to go back to 2D, and why I did that is now I'm going to look at creating the schedules a window schedule. And when I'm creating a window schedule, a couple of things come up. One, that window that I just inserted, it was a 4 by 4.6 by 4.6 picture window. You don't see it in this list. Windows that are not included in the quantities do not also appear in the window schedule. Okay, so if that's unchecked, it's not going to appear. Okay, so that is there. I'm going to go to the Setup tab, and you'll see elevation, and you can see the elevation of those windows. So we're giving you that graphic of what the window looks like. This is the same for the door schedule. You'll also see exactly what it looks like. For those of you that have never set up a window or a door schedule for you, I'm going to go through a couple of the different settings in here so that you can customize it once you see it. This particular layout is going to be the default layout in the template that ships with Envisioneer. So there is a template that you start your new drawings on. The schedule setup and format is part of that. Okay, so we have elevation here. That's just a heading. That could be elevations, or it could be different types of, I could call that view. Whatever I mark that as, you'll see that as what it's labeled at in the schedule itself. So that's just a word you can use there in that schedule. What it grabs, though, and where it gets that elevational view is from the content. All of the different contents listed here are specific to Windows. So I can get the graphic so that I can see what it's going to look like. I can get a description, I can get type, height, all the different elements that you see here. The new ones are graphic. New ones will also be a glass area, a grill style, frame type, frame color, glaze type, U factor, SHGC, values. Those are all new with version 16. All you have to do is make sure, let me see here, I got the graphic there, the elevation, this is the mark, the auto mark. All of them are just listed up here. Each one of these having a heading and content also has a width. So you'll see that mark right there is kind of being truncated at the top. So I'm going to change that to be 1 inch wide so that we can see the full value of mark there. And scrolling across, we can also see at the very end of this, we can count how many windows. Count is also being truncated off, so I'm going to make that 1.25. When you change any of these values, you have to put your cursor in a different box. So as soon as I'm done 1.25, I came over and put my cursor under heading here, so it sets that new value. And then count becomes part of that change. Okay, so once I click OK here, it will update that schedule, and I've got my elevational views. I've got the new glass area there. I click OK, and now I have my window schedule over here with those new values. Okay, so for those of you that have a very specific way you want to set up your Windows schedules, when you hit File and New in any Envisioneer project, these templates have predefined schedule settings in them. So if you're choosing one of these in version 16, that default Windows schedule setup that I had will be what you will have. You can alter those templates to have how you want your Windows schedule to come up every single time. Okay, so that's new in Pro Architect, Building Essentials, and Construction Suite. I'm going to go now and zoom back out under our entire model here. And I'm going to start talking about align and distribute. There are a lot of variables in align and distribute, and it's a very powerful tool. So I want to go over all of them so you have a good handle of how can you use it strategically. I'm going to give the example of aligning these trees up on my lot, but you could do it with columns or anything that you want to align or distribute evenly in a project. So I'm going to select these three trees just by holding down my select button. It allows me to pick the 3 trees. I'm also going to select this line. So I drew a line, and for those of you that didn't know you could draw a line, perhaps they're under Tools, Layout, Line. So I just drew a line, and that line represents the setback line of my site and where I want to distribute the trees. So you can use a line strategically, and it will be the last item that I pick. Okay, so I picked the trees and then I picked that line. The reason that I did that is when I right click here and I choose align, I have 2 options: align to everything that I selected or align to primary. What it means by align to primary is align to the primary object selected. The primary object is the last item that you selected. The last item I selected is that line. It's green. So when you select multiple objects, the one that is green, the one you selected last, is your primary object. So I want to align these 3 trees to that line. Okay, so with those 3 trees on that line, I can distribute them so that they all line up evenly spaced to the line itself. So the outside edge, so if I looked at these trees, if I chose this one as an example, the trees themselves would align themselves so that they are up against that line. If I chose the second one, they would align themselves so that they are centered on that line. And if I chose the last option, they would align themselves so the right-hand edge aligns themselves to that line. Okay, so that is their alignment values. So we have these objects in this orientation, but if they were horizontally across my screen, I would use this orientation. Okay, so these are the same. You'll recognize that there's a line, there's center in the middle, there's one to one edge and one to the other, but it's just the orientation of the objects on the screen. Are they in a horizontal or in a vertical orientation? Okay, so for ours, as an example, I am going to choose center, align to primary, click OK. and you can see it moved them over and aligned them along that line. Okay, if I edit, undo, select them by again holding down my shift key and the line, right click and choose align again, and this time we'll go to the outside of that line, click OK. You can see that I edit, undo. Sorry about that. I didn't choose to primary, so it aligned all of them. Right click, align, align to primary to the outside edge. See how they all moved? So if I align to selection, it's going to move all of them to be aligned together. Align to primary, click OK, moves these objects to align it with that object. Okay, I have them orientated. Now, next thing, with them still selected and this line still primary, right click, distribute. Okay, again, align to selection, all of them as one group, or align to primary. So I'm going to choose primary again. Distribute will take these trees and distribute them along the length of that line. Okay, so they can do that in a number of different ways. So I could have it aligned to the top edge. So that means that these trees, one will, let me just get my pen here. One will bring itself to the top edge of that line. One will come down here to the bottom, aligning itself to the bottom edge, and one will come along the center. Okay, so that's this orientation. Or it can exactly center them along the edges. So it'll align itself around the edge, align itself centered around there, and the same orientation in the middle. That would be this one. And then we have this one where it's doing the exact opposite. So we're going to align ourselves here, up and around, up and around, and in the center again. Okay, so that's aligning to the primary, either the center along those, or to the top edge, or to the bottom edge. The other option that you have here is spacing. So if you want equal spacing, and again, these are the same, it's just about the orientation of horizontally or vertically. Okay, so for ours, it's going to be a vertical, so we're going to use this one. So we could say evenly distribute them. So what that means is that it will distribute itself evenly along that line. We'll use that one as our first example so you can see how that's going to happen. So aligning to the primary, align these three trees to this primary object, the line, and evenly space them. Okay, so they're evenly spaced along that line, not going over it, but aligned to it. Okay, I can edit, undo, select them again, and then right click, distribute, align to primary, and this time I'll show you to the upward edge and click OK. So you can see that this tree block, its upward edge went to the top of that line. This middle one went to the top of the midpoint, and this bottom one the top of it went to the top of the bottom edge. So that's align and distribute. Okay, powerful when you understand how all of those different options. You'll come in there the very first time and think, and just play with it. If you forget everything that I went over, watch this video again, or play with them and learn how to do that. I am a big fan of using a layout line to help you distribute it over a set space. So you know exactly, I know exactly that I wanted these trees from this line endpoint to this line endpoint. And then I could distribute them and align them to that line. So think about using a line, and remember that for it to be primary, it's the last thing that you select. Okay, so very powerful to do that. And that is available in all of our products. So Pro Architect, Personal Architect, Building Essentials, and Construction Suite. Okay, our wizards, the house building wizard, the shed builder, and the floor and foundation builder all now include the structural floor utility. So I'm going to do a shed. Now, structural floors are only available in Building Essentials and Construction Suite. So pro architect and personal architect people watch and learn, but it's not something that you'll use in your version of Envisioneer. So when you're building a shed, and if you've never built a shed before, it's a handy little tool. You can tell it whatever size and style of shed that you want. So you can see you have gable to gable, hip roof, shed roof, or a gable in the other orientation. Give it its size, click next. Where do you want windows? You can orientate them. This is nothing new. This page includes something new. If I click on floor, previously it only allowed you to choose a floor surface. So that floor surface could be a concrete pad or hardwood flooring or tile, but it didn't show the framing underneath it. It wasn't a true structural floor. Now, when you pick on floor, and if you're using Building Essentials or Construction Suite, you have the ability to select structural floor and click OK. That will bring up the catalog of different structural floors for you to select. So I'm going to choose the 2x10 floor system with 3/4 inch OSB. And you'll notice when I give it, and I'll just put this in a rendered outline view, it's also got a sill plate underneath there. The joist, the subfloor, the band joist, the rim joist are all part of that package. Okay. And then I click OK. So it's going to have, this shed is going to have that floor system. I click next and finish, and I place my shed in the backyard. And if I go to a 3D view, we can see our shed. Okay, so there's our shed sitting in the backyard. By going to view, framing, display framing, you can see our structural floor underneath. There's the 2x10 joist, the 2x10 rim and band joists around there. And if I give this a flip up and go underneath, maybe it's best to see it here. You can see it right in there. There's our treated board, our sill plate as well. Okay, so that's new in version 16. Before you couldn't pick and have that structural floor, but now you can. So if you are using the Wizard's floor and foundation wizard, I mean, that's the only way I do a foundation or including a second floor. Now it's just not the finish. You can actually have that whole structural floor be part of that package when you create that next level or level below as well. So you'll find that particularly helpful in the additional stories above and when you're creating a shed builder that has an actual framed floor instead of a slab that it's put on. Okay, view, framing, display with the framing. Again, that's Building Essentials Construction Suite. Okay, back in 2D view, going to zoom in here in the back corner. I've drawn 2 sliding glass doors, and I'm going to combine them into one unit. When you're using corner doors, and this is the same for corner windows, they must be the same element. I can't have a 6068 and a 5068 door. They have to be the same. You can't combine dissimilar products. Okay, and that's the same for orientation. Right now, they're both orientated the same way, but if I flip this opening so its orientation is opposite, they will not be able to be combined. They have to be the same orientation and the same type of door unit for you to be able to use them. Okay, and then I select one, I select the other, I right click and select Create Corner Opening. For doors, there's only 2 options available. You'll see the third one in the middle grayed out there. That's available for windows, but doors, we can only combine them in a corner at the leaf or by adding an additional frame in that corner. And I'll show you both. So I'm going to choose glass or leaf, and then it combines them as one door in that corner. And if I go back to that roof view, you should be able to slide down and see that here. So you can see them combined in here, and they're combined at the leaf. Okay. Once they're combined, if I select them, they're one unit. But if I right click and go to properties, properties allows me to change how they're joined. Okay, it doesn't allow me to go back and look at their individual properties and change anything about them. You have to do that before you combine them. Properties this time means how am I attaching these two windows together. So I'll change this to frame so you can see the difference in the frame there, and might go to just a hidden line view so you can see that post attached in the middle there. So again, if I select that, right click properties, go to glass, you can see we don't have that post at the middle. It's just attached at the leaf of the door itself. If you want to make these go apart again, maybe you want to change a setting of them, you can select the door, right click, and select break. That breaks them apart. And once they're broken apart, you can look at their individual properties again and change their properties. But remember that they have to be identical doors or identical windows to be able to combine them. And they also have to be in the exact same orientation. If they're not, they will not combine. So just be conscious of that when you're using corner doors or corner windows. They have to be there. Okay, I'm going to go back out to our initial view here. In our initial view, you saw that we had different plants. Lots of fantastic new plants available in Envisioneer 16. All of them are true 3D plants. So if I grab onto a coniferous tree, a pine tree, and bring it in, I'm seeing that exact tree. Now, this tree is huge. Previously, when you're, and still, if you're using the 2D billboard plants, you had growth over time. So you could shrink this tree and say it's only 2 years old. You don't have growth over time for the 3D trees, but under their properties, you can change their height to be a very specific height. So we're not telling it that it's a 1-year-old sapling. We're telling it that this tree is only 12 feet tall. And that will change uniformly all of the other widths and height because this is checked. Okay, if you don't have uniform scale checked, then it will not uniformly scale them. So I could change the height, but the width would still be the same original. So when I click OK, now I have that 12-foot tall Australian pine, one which would be smaller. So you don't have growth over time, but you have the ability, and I think a better ability anyway, to say what the actual size is that you want that tree to be. It's more accurate for you there. And as a side note, all of the trees that are in the catalog that are billboard trees, they're still there. You will still have them. If they're not under X frog, that means that they're still the billboard plants, and you can still insert them. And I'm going to say a caveat to that for now. 2D billboard plants are going to be phased out. They're here in version 16. They will not be there in future releases. And over time, they will no longer work. The technology used for those billboard plants is extremely old. It's one of the very first things that was part of Envisioneer, and one of the last things that's that needs to go because it's just so old and it can't keep up to current technology. So the 2D billboard trees are there. I would recommend not using them because they will disappear over time. They won't be there in version 17. And the 3D trees that are in there now, they honestly look so much better. They render nicely. They look realistic. They're just a better looking tree. So you can use them. So another tip I want to give you is when you're inserting these plants there, you'll notice in here there's coniferous trees, deciduous trees. We have fruit trees, we have flowers. And when you're inserting them, you're inserting all individual elements. So a big tip, I inserted, what do I have here? 7 daisies in the daisy family, Gerba daisies. And if I know that I'm going to insert these in another model, I like having the 7 there. It's an orientation I would use again. I'm going to right click and say select all similar. So I have all 7 of those done. And then I'm going to right click and tell it that I want to add that to a group. So I can insert 7 daisies together all the time. The first thing that it asks me, and look down in the lower left-hand corner of my screen, is what is the insertion point? Okay, so when I go to insert them again, where do I want to insert them from? Do I want from this corner, or I could hit enter and the center of that grouping of flowers would be my insertion point. Okay, so I could hit enter for center. And then it tells me that here's, the block, the group that I'm creating. And I'm going to say that this is a Gerba Daisy group. Okay, and I'm going to click OK. Put that back into 2D, zoom out, go back to my building tab, go to my groups, and there you'll see Gerba Daisy group. So where I can insert now from the center line, because that's what I chose, Gerba daisies. Okay, and keep inserting them. With the groups, they're all individual. It just helped me to insert 7 of them very quickly. So if you want to put them into orientations that you like and then save them as a group, that will save you time so you don't have to individually put in 14 Gerba daisies. It puts them all in together. So I find that very helpful when you're dealing with the flowering plants. Obviously, with the coniferous and deciduous trees, they're bigger. They might not always have the same orientation. But when you're planting flowers, you tend to always do that same type of grouping. And it doesn't have to be the same type of plants. I should say that I chose 7 daisies, but I could have had my African violets in that group as well and inserted them together and saved them as a group. So groups can be dissimilar items saved together to save you time when you're inserting them. And I think you'll find that quite handy for the plants themselves. Okay, back down into 2D. The plants are available in all of our products. So Personal Architect, Pro Architect, Building Essentials, Construction Suite, all of you have that ability to put in those plants. Okay, I'm just going to zoom out. 2 other things I want to cover before we wrap up. I know we're getting close to closing time here. One of them is down here on the bottom band, you'll now find that you can turn on and off solid fill. Previously, you had to go up to settings, document settings, building aids, and turn on solid fill. This quick, easy solid fill on, solid fill off. It's there. And one thing I want to point out, and it's a question we get a lot into technical support, is solid filling, not just the walls, but floors and different items as well. So I'm just going to step inside into an interior view so I can easily select this floor. I'm going to right click and look at the properties of this floor and go to its line work tab. Under line work, you'll see 2D surface. When I'm looking at this floor in 2D as a surface, here are the properties for it. And I can apply a solid fill. And that solid fill can be any color that you want. Okay, so when you solid fill through, each individual room can have a different color. So if you wanted to, in your floor plan, to make it easier for someone to understand it, have different colors for different floors depending on the usage of that space. So maybe for common areas like a living room, you would have one color. And for utility rooms like a kitchen or a garage, it has a different room. And for private quarters like a bedroom or an ensuite, you would have a different color. So every floor, separate floor, can have a different color. So when I click OK here and OK, go back to 2D, you can see that was all one floor and it's now all yellow. So you can use that strategically in your plans as well, and turn it on, turn it off. Quite handy having it docked down there. That's just a time saver. Okay, one last thing I want to show you. I'm going to go to File and import an IFC file. IFC files can be brought in as an object. So an IFC file is just a more intelligent block, if you will. It brings along with it information. Those can be brought in through our object wizard. So if you brought in that range and it was an IFC file, you can bring that in. But an IFC file can also be an entire project. And I'm going to do that now. I'm going to import an IFC file that is an entire project. So just bear with me while I go out onto my hard drive and find the IFC file that I want to bring in. Here it is. I'll click open. So bringing that in is just like the same routine as bringing in other elements. But this time it tells me that running this IFC import will erase any drawings and things that I have. I'm going to say no because in case anybody has any questions, let me start a new project first. And in this new project, I'll bring in that IFC so I don't wipe away any of the work we've done. File, import, IFC out on my desktop. I have the beach house. Okay, so I've selected an IFC file and it's saying it's going to delete it. I know that it's in a blank document. What's new with the IFC import in version 16 is that now you get to see all the different objects that it's going to bring in. And you can say, I don't need some of these, and uncheck them that you don't want them to come in, or check them all. And when they do come in, tell them that you want to separate them by layer, distinguish them by layer. And because it's bringing it in, and this is bringing it in as a project, that project needs to know what the height of the default walls, height of the ceilings, and the head height that you want to establish in the building locations dialog box. Walls that you bring in are going to have a height to them already that was established when someone created that IFC. So it's not automatically going to turn them into 8-foot walls. Just new walls that you might draw in this project as a default will be 8 foot. And the ceiling and any new ceilings you put in as a default will be 8 foot. And I click OK. That will bring in that IFC file into Envisioneer. Down at the very bottom, you can see all of the different entities that it's importing. That was over 53,000 different objects. All of them are intelligent and separated. When you bring in a block, normally they're individual elements. The key part of IFCs is they're individual. So this is a wall. This is a roof surface. This is a door. This is a window, and it's an IFC. So I can select one wall, select all similar. It recognizes them as walls. So an IFC brings it in. Envisioneer says, oh, that's a wall because the IFC said it's saved as a wall, and it brings it in as a wall. So we recognize it as a wall. So I can replace it with other walls that are in my catalog. So if I wanted to frame it as 2x6 brick, it can become 2x6 brick. If I wanted to take this roof surface, select all the same surfaces, and replace them with a surface that's cedar shakes, I can change them to cedar shakes. So I have the ability to replace and change them as I would because IFCs are intelligent. They come in knowing what they are, and then you can replace them. So these walls, if I go to View, Framing, Display Framing, settings, sorry, building locations, my bad. Ground floor, framing objects, let's bring that in. It doesn't have default framing, but I'll give it 16 inches on center. Okay. And once that's all set up, they will have their framing with them as well. So they're powerful. Bringing in an IFC, if you're sharing files with everyone and bringing in projects that someone else might have started, if you share them as IFCs, you have more power. So new with version 16 is you can say what you want and don't want to bring in, and you can also set up your building location's default heights at the same time. So powerful. That's a whirlwind explanation of all of the new tools and how to use them. Again, I wish I could give you a date for when version 16 is shipping. As soon as we get the go ahead, it is sitting there waiting for me to hit a send button, and everybody gets an email with a download link. And I will make that happen as soon as I can. So once they give the go ahead, you will have it. Again, they just want to make sure that everything works as expected. And I know you're probably thinking, well, it looked pretty good in this presentation. Nothing failed, nothing fell down. There's just little imperfections that they want to make sure that it's perfect before they get to you. So give them some time. It's close. They'll be sending it out to you, and then you'll be able to use all of these new features. Again, I did record this class for you. I'll send you a link, so you'll find it up on our YouTube page. Hopefully by the time I get it up on YouTube, and I'll have a version 16 link to go with it, so you'll be able to download the software and watch the video again. Thank you so very much for upgrading for version 16. We appreciate your support and that you believe in our products, and we will get out version 16 as soon as we can. Thanks so very much for joining me today. I wish you all the best in your today. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.